You see here we have the default maps and the startup map. If we click this little triangle here, we can pick which level we're going to start with. So now whenever we come back into the editor for this project, we're going to start on our nice clean level, and whenever we play the game, this is the map that we're going to start with. All right. Again, so let's take a quick look at this. All right, so we are actually running around on the ground. We just can't see it there due to the way that our camera is set up. So I think before we get into camera, though, let's take a look at our sprites. Let's go ahead and make a new folder, selecting Demo, New Folder, and we'll say Sprites. And I'm going to make another new folder here. Whoops, New Folder. And this will be our character. All right, now I'm going to browse over to our project. So let's see, actually, where did I put that stuff? Okay, up on the desktop here, here's our artwork. And let's go back there. This is my project folder here. I'm going to create, this is just my workflow. I like to create a source folder within my project, keep it all together. And we'll drag this in. So we've got some character art, a couple random other pieces of miscellaneous art, and some environment art as well. We'll take a look at in a second. All right, we don't really need to look at tutorials. Okay. So for our character, let's go ahead and right click and we'll say import. And we're going to go ahead and find our, let's see, there's our projects, demo, source. Okay, here's our artwork. Here. So I'm going to just grab our character art and drag that right into the browser. Or actually, I'm selecting at this point. Yeah, we'll do that. Okay. All right, so what had happened there is you can actually drag and drop assets into the browser, which is what I typically do. But since I'm working on one screen, I went to import and basically imported it twice. Anyway. All right, so here's our sprite. It's basically a texture at this point. So if we go ahead and open this up and we zoom in here, you can see we have our character art, and it looks a little fuzzy. And the reason that is because it was authored at such a low res, because we are doing a low res 8-bit style game. And we've got bilinear filtering going on and all sorts of other stuff that you would typically want in a texture that was mapped on a model. But for our retro game, that's not really what we're going for. So let's go back out to our asset browser here. And if we right click on that texture, up on Sprite Actions, if we scroll over, I did that a little fast, but if we say Create Sprite, that's not what I want to do. Let's go ahead and delete that. Okay, if I right-click Sprite Actions, and then we want to use Configure for Retro Sprites. So you see that the texture changed there a little bit. Now if I double-click and open that up, a little bit difficult to tell with this background. But if I zoom in here, you'll see things are nice, and we have that nice hard edge going on. And the reason that is because we swapped the texture group here. Basically, these are a bunch of different configurations that you can use for textures. And the one that we want to use right now is UI. Basically, all that does is says that it's going to set our texture compression to uncompressed and turn off our filtering. All right. So now we want to create sprites out of this. So we'll go ahead and right-click this again, and we're going to go ahead and extract sprites. So we do that, and boom, there we go. We have all of our sprites. So since this texture was created with all of the different frames nice and evenly spaced, it was a pretty easy job for Unreal to go ahead and just extract all these in one shot. So if we double-click, so this is our first sprite here. A couple things we want to change right out of the gate. I like to show the grid, and I'm going to change this from 10 units to 1. So what I'm really trying to go for here is I like working with 1 pixel per grid unit. If you scroll over to the side here on the details panel, you see pixels per unit. It defaults to 1.28. I'm going to go ahead and change that to 1. And if we zoom back up, there you go. You see each pixel of the character maps directly to a unit in Unreal Space. So the other thing I like to do is for characters, we have this pivot mode. I like to go ahead and set that to bottom center. So now we have him kind of sitting on this plane here. It's a nice, when we're doing our animations, it's a good way to line things up. It basically acts as a ground plane. All right, so we'll save him. He's cool. Now, we could go through and do each one of those individually, but that takes a lot of time. So the fast way around this is I'm going to go ahead and shift-click and select all the remaining sprites, and then right-click, and then from midway up, you'll see Asset Actions. Let's scroll over and down, and from the Property Matrix, we can see all of the sprites that we had selected. Now, over on the side here, we can see all of the parameters that are common to sprites. And again, the ones that we're interested in, pixels per unit, and we want to go bottom center. Okay. Cool. So again, now we've got this guy line. Now over on the side here, we can see all of the parameters that are common to sprites. And again, the ones that we're interested in, pixels per unit, and we want to go bottom center. Okay. Cool. So again, now we've got this guy lined up on the floor plane, and we're snapping to the grid. So everything's good. All right, real quick here. So I'm monitoring questions over on the other monitor here. The first question is, can you please show the same process but without the sprite sheet? I'm an animator, so I have frame-by-frame sequence. So really all you would do is you would drag in or import your individual frames, and instead of doing the extract sprites, you would just say create sprite, and it would automatically turn your single frames into a sprite. So it's a lot easier and quicker, though, to pack your sprites. So in the end, there's no big difference, but it just really depends on how you want to work. All right, so what were we up to? We made our sprites, and now we need some animations. So we'll start with a stance. So the first three, yeah, normally, by the way, I would go through and rename all of these, but we don't really have time for all that. So let's go ahead and select our first 3 frames here. This is going to be our first animation, our stance animation or our idle animation, and we'll right-click, and we're going to create what's called a flipbook. So there it is there, and I'm going to preface it with A for animation, and I'll call it stance. All right, so there we see our twitchy little guy. If I hit enter and open him up, here we are in the flipbook editor. Okay, so we have frames per second over here. Now typically I don't mess around with the frames per second too much. I leave it at the default 15. You can go ahead and adjust this on an animation by animation basis, but I like to have consistency there, and if I'm going to be adjusting the timing of my animations, I'll typically do it down in the timeline. You see we have these 3 white boxes. Now you can go ahead and drag these out, and this is basically how many ticks, or how many, basically the hold for each frame of animation. So if you mouse over, you can see that you actually get information on which sprite is being used per frame. So this is sprite 0, sprite 1, and sprite 2. So not the world's most interesting stance animation, but it'll work. And if we wanted to add new frames, we could go ahead and do that here, or over from the list. You'll see the same list of sprites here as well. So we could go ahead and hit this plus key and add sprites. So however you want to work really is how you can do it there. And we have a reference to the material. I don't think we're going to cover materials and sprite materials today. There are a bunch of, oh, by the way, I'm working in 4.7.6. 4.8 is on the way. There's a lot of new Paper 2D features and functionality coming along. That's really cool. Some new material stuff. So I'm going to hold off on materials for today. But just so you know, this is where you would access materials for your flipbooks. All right, so there's our first animation. And to get us started, we'll need a jump. Now the jump is just 1 frame, so we'll go ahead and create a flipbook. And again, I'll call it for your flipbooks. All right, so there's our first animation. And to get us started, we'll need a jump. Now the jump is just 1 frame, so we'll go ahead and create a flipbook. And again, I'll call it a jump. And we don't really need to do too much in here because 1 frame, that's fine. We don't need to adjust any timings. And we want our run. We need a run to get us going here as well. So there are 3 frames for the run. I'm going to go ahead and create a flipbook again, and then a run. All right, so this looks pretty bad. Let's go ahead and I think we probably want like 3 or 4 ticks here. Okay, getting better, but looks a little funky. And the reason is because even though there are 3 distinct frames in the animation, the way that this was originally designed was the crossing frame, this frame here, sprite 9, we're gonna use that twice. We're gonna duplicate that. So if we go ahead and right click and duplicate, so now you see there's sprite 9 and there's sprite 9 again. We can click and drag this to the end of the timeline. So now we have our crossing frame at the beginning and the end of the the middle and the end of the animation, and looks a little better. All right. And we'll just wait for autosave. All right, good time to check the questions. Sprites flipbook will be used for UMG for use of simple animations. Oh, so I guess the question is, can you use sprites in UMG? You know, actually, I'm not sure. I haven't tried it, but typically I think you'd probably want to use some of the more standard methods for animating textures, like a UV offset or something to that effect. Okay. All right. That's probably good enough to get going here. And let's see. Let's go back. All right, so let's go ahead and fix up our character blueprint. Oh, real quick, I saw this question pop up. How do you create a sprite sheet? So externally, typically, with Photoshop or GIMP or whatever methods you want to use, there's a ton of 2D animation tools out there, the names of which are escaping me at the moment. But basically, any way that you can make a texture, that's what you would use for a sprite. All right, so our character. Double-click to open him back up, and let's go to the viewport. First things first, let's click our sprite component, and we'll get rid of our blue guy here. So let's pick our stance. Okay, so first thing that we see, we have our tiny little retro sprite, and our collision capsule is pretty huge. So if we went ahead and hit play now, oh, you know what? Did I not pick? Let's go over to our world settings. Yeah, because I made a new level, I have to override the game mode again. So let's go ahead and hijack that side-scrolling game mode. And okay, so there's BP Dude. All right, so now when we play, why is Dude? Oh, because we need to replace the other animations. All right, so let's go to the event graph. All right, and here you see where we're updating animation. We mentioned that previously. Let's go ahead and pick our stance animation for the idle and our run animation. Okay, so that should be good. There we go. All right, so way off in the distance, you see our tiny little guy. I'm going to go ahead and hit the tilde key and say show collision. All right, so you can see that the capsule is really huge. It's actually resting on the ground there. That's currently invisible due to the way the camera's set up. So we have a bunch of stuff to fix up, really. So first things first, I think maybe what we'll do is let's go ahead and fix that camera. So we'll take our camera boom and just go ahead and reset some of this stuff here. If we go to the viewport, you see that we've got like this offset here on the boom, on the spring arm. So let's go ahead and just bring that back down so we're looking directly at our character there. Next, we'll pick the camera. And you'll see that we're set for an ortho camera, which is ultimately what we want. Really quick, though, let's go ahead and hit perspective. Now if we hit play, so we can see our guy is actually moving around in the world. He's floating in the air because of that capsule. It does not match the sprite size. So that's probably the next thing we should fix up. Let's go back to our ortho view here. And yeah, let's do that. Let's get our capsule. Where's our capsule? And we're going to go ahead and shrink that down. So we have two settings here, capsule radius, and we'll make that really tiny. There we go, somewhere, probably not that tiny. Let's go somewhere in the neighborhood of 8. I found works pretty well for this particular sprite. And then the half height, we're going to take that way down. And we're going to turn that to 10 is a pretty decent size. All right. Now let's grab our sprite. You can just go ahead and select him, and we're just going to pull him down so that the capsule matches him a little bit better. Somewhere probably in the neighborhood of that. So again, hard to see because we don't have our resolution set properly. So let's go over to our camera again. All right,